I was in Israel 24 hours ago, so if I fall asleep in the middle, it's not because I'm boring myself, although that's possible also. I actually came directly from a wedding. I don't know if you remember that 6 months ago, a man named Ari Fuld was stabbed and killed by terrorists. And his daughter Tamar is best friends since they were little girls with my daughter Neely. So it was a very emotional wedding. Tamar got married last night. It was incredibly joyous. Like, I looked at the roof at one point and couldn't believe it was still on. And it was also heartbreaking because there's a time during the ceremony where the father blesses his daughter, and he wasn't there to do that. The grandfathers did, but it's not the same. And I think to many degrees that wedding ceremony symbolizes what life in Israel is like. That there are very difficult times, and so what we do is make more of the joyous times. And the pendulum swings very wide in Israel, because the difficult times can be so difficult that you can't imagine that you can even get out of bed the next morning. And the joyous times are so joyous that you're not on the floor. Like, you look at your feet because you're sure that you're not connected to the ground. And it sounds almost like it's not doable, but it is doable. It turns out that those two things of great joy and deep grief can sit together. And where they sit together is where I find God. In what you can't understand and what shouldn't be possible but somehow is, those for me are the God moments. And I live among extraordinary people. I shouldn't be there by all rights. I went to Israel for the first time when I was 8 years old. My father was actually raised in Jerusalem. He is what you would now call, he has Palestinian papers because they fled Nazi Germany when the Nazis came to power. He was born in Berlin, and he grew up in Jerusalem as a refugee. And until 1948, the Palestinians were Jews. Some of you read the Jerusalem Post. It used to be called the Palestine Post. And it wasn't until 1948 in the creation of the State of Israel, when anybody then within the state is called an Israeli, that somehow you get this idea of another people who claim that they're the indigenous people because they take on that name. They'd never taken that on before. So my mother's American. She moved to Israel in the 1950s, and they met. I ended up growing up in the United States. But the first time we went was when I was 8 years old, and I fell in love with the land. I can't explain it to this day, but I got there, and it wasn't an easy trip. My grandfather was estranged from my father, and he had come to visit us, and he died while he was visiting us. It's like a totally crazy story. So we went to Israel to bury him. So it shouldn't have been the greatest trip, and I just felt at home in a way that I have never felt anywhere. And I vowed to myself, and I was 8, so everybody laughed at me, that one day I was going to live in Israel, and I was going to raise my children in Israel. But I was 8. So any of you guys, if you're 8 and you tell your parents that this is what I'm going to do, make sure they take you seriously, okay? If you take yourself seriously, then the people around you will too. Anyhow, as I got into my teens, I became more observant. My Judaism started, I'm sure you're all familiar with Judaism. There's a lot of things to do, all right? So I became more observant. I started keeping the Sabbath, like not, being on, well, there were no computers then, now that I think about it. Imagine, there were no computers or cell phones. Wow. I'm either very old or the world is working at a very fast pace. But I really started carving out those 25 hours to have a special time, like to create a space for God in my life. The busier the world has gotten, with more instruments that we now have to wean ourselves away from during those 25 hours, the more I appreciate Shabbat, the Sabbath. It's not just a day of rest, it's a day of coming back to who I am, whatever that means, which I think is what God meant it to be. Creating was his day job, all right? And he took a day to go back to whatever he is, whatever that means, and he's asking us to do the same, which is just an outrageous thought. To be like him in some way is really something. So I started doing that, and I only would date guys that would promise to move to Israel because, look, America's a wonderful country, and I I didn't leave America because I didn't like America. I happen to love the United States of America. It's a wonderful country that's given everyone tremendous opportunities. I'm very concerned now for the United States. I happen to be more worried about the United States right now than I am about Israel. And I think you guys all feel that, and there's something going on here that you have to really be aware of. One thing in Israel is that there's no naivete. Like, everybody knows what's going on. We have many differences of opinion on how to deal with what's going on, but we all know what's going on, all right? You can't be blind to things happening there because it's right there. And in the United States, I think you can distract yourself. In general, in the Western world, I think you can distract yourself. If you look at how the Roman Empire ended, they had something called panet kirkas, bread and circuses, which was give people very cheap food and essentially free water and a lot of entertainment, and then they won't really be paying attention to what's happening around them. So look what's happening in the West today, right? Rock stars and TV stars and all this Instagram following this one and that one, and you can eat at McDonald's for $5, and right? And so you're more interested, or a lot of people are more interested in the newest iPhone than they are in some of the bigger picture things that are happening. So when you know history, you start seeing this happened this way before. Is anybody paying attention? And I'm not so sure that enough people are paying attention. In Israel, we have to pay attention. We have no choice. So I would only date guys who would move to Israel, and I found somebody, and we're going to be married 38 years in June. Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of work, as all of you know. So we decided to finish school before we wanted to move to Israel. We decided to get educated. My husband became a physician. I was on my way to get a doctorate in, first I started dental school, but I didn't like it, so I moved over to psychology. I was accepted to the doctoral program, but we already had 3 kids, and I was afraid they were 5, 3, and 1, and I was afraid that if we waited longer, we wouldn't go. We would get settled, he would open a practice. I just felt like the time was right, and I would just kind of, I had faith in God, and I would just put it there that he was going to make my life interesting. Boy, I had absolutely no idea how interesting it was going to be. So I have a master's degree in psychology, left the doctorate behind. We moved to Israel. We moved to a place called Efrat, which is in Gush Etzion. I see Bethlehem outside my window. It's just to the south of Bethlehem. It's actually the last area where the Jews had some kind of sovereignty, some kind of state in the 2nd century. What's called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 135. Rabbi Akiva, if you're familiar with the great scholar, that was his time period. He's tortured to death by the Romans after that battle. And that was for about 3.5 years. There was a small state of Judea in the area that I live today. So I really feel that I've come home, and that everything that I do is a victory against the people that thought that we were done. One of my sons, we moved to Israel with 3 children. We had 4 more after we got there. And one of my sons is now studying medicine in Italy. We have some kind of affirmative action in Israel. So some of the Jewish Israelis don't have place in medical school after they finish the army and some of the responsibilities that they have. And so he's in Italy studying medicine. So we've been to Italy a few times to visit him, and he got married there a 1.5 years ago. And I find that it's very difficult the first time to be in Rome. We went to see the Arch of Titus. I don't know if any of you have been to Rome. So there's a famous arch that has the engraving of apparently the Roman soldiers taking the menorah, the big candelabra out of the temple, and some of the other things that were in the temple, and bringing it in victory to Rome. And we were with a guide, because we take a guide wherever we go. We do a Jewish tour because I want to know where my people were, how they survived. Usually ends in 1945, whatever Jewish community was in Europe. And she heard my husband and I were speaking English, and she said to us, "Where are you guys from?" And I said, because she had just explained to us that this was the sacking of Judea and Jerusalem. And I said, "Well, actually, we live in Judea." And I started crying because there are no more Romans. Well, the Italians aren't the Romans anymore. And all the people that have come after us over the years don't exist anymore. And we're home. And this is not just a coincidence, and this just didn't happen. It is clear to me, and I would say to most Israelis, that something bigger than us is happening. that God brought his people home against all odds. And to feel like that every single day, to wake up and to feel like I'm part of what the prophets talked about, like Zechariah talks about one day, children will be, boys and girls will be playing in the streets, and old men and women will be sitting on a bench with their cane, right? And which also emphasizes how old they are. And I see that all the time. And to understand the prophets, you need to know when they lived, the context of their life. So Zechariah is one of the last prophets with Malachi and with Haggai. And he's prophesying in a Jerusalem that had been completely destroyed, like the Babylonians when the first temple was destroyed. So when he was saying this, people must have thought, like, what are you saying? Like, this is just ridiculous. This is not going to happen. And here I am doing that. So for me, even seeing a child play in the street is a sign that God didn't forget my people and that he promised something and he kept his promise, which is just, I can't even describe what it means, and maybe some of you understand that, what it means to live like that. So when to get back to Rome for a second, it's difficult there because their victories were the defeat, a lot of them were the defeats of us. And so, but I do that and we try and travel because I think it's important to learn the other perspective, even sometimes learn the enemy's perspective, to understand why they think the way they do, to be able to sit with that and not agree with them, but to understand why they think like that. If you're married, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, all right, where sometimes you're looking at your spouse and thinking, where is that coming from? Like, I just don't understand this person at all, okay, but I understand, given the context of his life, why he would think like that, all right? But really, you can take personal relationships and extrapolate them out onto bigger ones. And the reason that I'm saying that is because I come to the United States and Canada, and I was in England in December, and I think that people have lost the ability to have that discourse with mutual respect. I'm totally tolerant of your opinion as long as you agree exactly with what I think, all right? And that's not tolerance. Look, there's no one in the world that thinks exactly the same way as I do about anything, including myself. I probably don't agree with myself what I was thinking last week. So you have to be able to be fluid like that, to be secure enough in who you are. And this is something that I had to learn. Just the fact that I'm sitting up here is totally not anything that I would have expected. I was the quietest and the shyest and had absolutely no self-confidence growing up. And my feeling is that because I put my faith in Hashem, in God, he put his faith in me. And that he gave me the ability to communicate with people, to love people. If any of you have listened to the show, I love interviewing people, which doesn't mean that I agree with them. Very often I'll have someone on, and I don't agree with their opinions. I'm giving them a platform to say what they want to say. We're having the conversation. Doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with them, but I'm respectful. And that is not something that I would have thought that I would be able to do. And I think that I was given a gift to be able to do that because I'm doing it for my people and for God. And I don't take that for granted for a minute either. I don't think that I could get up and like sell cars and do a great job at selling cars. And this is important, and because there are kids here, so that's something that I would like you guys to hear, because I wish somebody had told me this a long time ago, is that there's something really special about you that nobody else has. And don't try and be like anybody else. Be like you. Be the best you can be, because God has something that he wants you to do, and only you can do that. And we spend way too much time comparing ourselves to other people, and I want to be prettier and smarter and taller and whatever it is, or richer. And that is such a waste of time, because you are who you're supposed to be, and you just have to figure out what it is that God wants from you. So for me, living in Israel has not only just changed who I am, but it's made me see God in the little things. So I try and be careful, let's say, about making blessings over food, because even that is nothing to take for granted. I mean, really, the fact that you could put a seed in the ground and in a few years eat apples off a tree, that's a miracle. So how come we don't appreciate that? We too often just take so many things for granted. And so often we feel entitled to things, which is one thing that you don't have in Israel. Because things can change in a minute, and because we have tragedies like what I told you about, Tamar's father, so there are very few people who have a sense of entitlement in Israel. We really have never stopped our war of independence. So it gets quieter sometimes. We don't have a full-fledged war, but we always have people guarding. And there's the expression in Hebrew, Hinei lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. Basically, the Lord never slumbers or sleeps. But he also has people who help do that. And the fact that we even have an army and that we can defend ourselves, and my children have served in the armed forces, and it's not an easy thing to do. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the armed forces or have children. Washing the dog tags of your own child, knowing what they mean, is a very difficult experience. On the other hand, I told you my father was born in Germany, and part of his family didn't leave Germany in time, because who could imagine? You know, we know what happened, but they didn't know what was going to happen. And so they never got out, and they were killed. And I think to myself, wow, if we'd only had this army 70 years ago, if we'd only had this state 70 years ago, then what happened in Europe in 1939 to 45 wouldn't have happened. And so with the fear of them being okay, my kids, when they went to the army, there's also a tremendous sense of pride and a tremendous sense of gratitude. Being able to defend yourself is a pretty big thing. You know, a lot of people will say that the worst thing is absolute power, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But there's something that's worse than that, and that's absolute powerlessness. When you can't help yourself at all, you will do anything. And that is something that my people have learned the hard way. And so that's not something that we take for granted. And one of the things that bothers me tremendously is when people try and weaken us. They've tried to beat us in battles, and it turns out that we win. So there are now a lot of people trying to undercut us by trying to get us to weaken ourselves, and by trying to get us to give away land and give up other features that we need to keep us secure, and kind of get us to whittle away at that. And that perhaps is the most dangerous thing that we have right now, is getting in our own way, if you will. And that's where your community, and I think also many, many Christians come into play. I think we're in a time now where we're all kind of being tested to see, you know, a lot of things have happened in the past that weren't pretty and weren't easy. And sometimes you might find that Jews are a little wary of Christians, a little reticent about the relationship. Some of it, of course, is because of concern about being missionized, which is proselytized to, which is not something that Jews do. And the other one is because there's been a not easy history over the past hundreds or 1,500 years. And with all that, we're all very concerned, and rightly so, with Islam in its virulent form, jihadist Islam, global jihad, things that should worry everybody, not just those living in Israel. There has been a difficult history of persecution of Jews by Christians, and it's going to take time for that to work out. When I look at communities as yourselves and I guide people in Israel, it's an amazing thing to be able to guide with the Bible in my hand. And what's so wonderful is how well many of you now know the Bible. Sad to say, sometimes better than my co-religionists. And it's really a joy to be able to take people around. I've been a tour guide for the last 10 years when my kids got a little bigger, because being a tour guide is very intense and you're out of the house sometimes for days at a time. And to be able to go to the places. Has everyone been to Israel? Who hasn't been? Wow, that's too many hands. You guys have to come. No, there's nothing like it. It's like you open the book and it then becomes a pop-up book. You immerse yourself in the place. You stand and see where this happened, and you understand why it happened this way and why they came from there and what's going on and why they had to cross the river because that's where the river is. And all of a sudden, it takes on a completely new meaning. Look, the Tanakh or the Torah is not a history book. A lot of people make that mistake. And especially that mistake is made vis-a-vis archaeology. And then some people get upset because maybe the years don't work or they're not finding proof of something. And I think that's a mistake. The Tanakh it has a lot of history in the context of the book, for sure, and the place in Israel. But it's really a book of ethics. It's a book of how people should behave, not just with God, but with each other. And I don't know if we all realize how much this book changed the world. All right, America is founded on what we call Judeo-Christian values and Bible values. That's what my people did. That was the job that we were given at Sinai, is to take this book and take a book that I think is, if you really want to focus on what it stands for, I would say that it stands for faith and family. If you really want to just make it really, really simple, it stands for a whole lot of things, but if you just want to take, I think, the two major planks of the Bible is faith and family. And when I say faith, I'm not saying religion. I'm saying faith, because those are very different, okay? And there's people of all different religions who don't have faith. And there's people of all different religions who do have faith. And I think that that's going to be the new dividing line, and I know I'm not the only person who has said this, is between people who believe in God and people who don't, of all different religions. So what the Torah gives us is what people do when they have faith. And it's not an easy book. There's no one there who's perfect. For me, it gives me a tremendous amount of strength, because so many of these people were great despite their imperfections, or they managed to get over that and become great anyway. So for me, as a little human being, that gives me a tremendous amount of strength, that I too can become better than I was the day before, and that my journey is my own journey, and I look at their journeys in a very personal way. Because I have that timeline. You know, when I go to Hebron and I go to the Tomb of the Patriarchs, Abraham and Sarah, they're my grandparents. There's a direct line. And so I came to the land, and there were always Jews in the land. This is something that I actually have arguments with some of the guys on the station, as it turns out, who talk about we came home after 2,000 years. And that's not true. There were always Jews living in the land of Israel. There has never been a time where there weren't Jews living in the land of Israel, very often getting buffeted by whoever came through. So when the Crusades came in, they killed the Muslims and the Jews. And when the Muslims came in, they killed the Christians and the Jews. And I was in Hebron a few years ago, and I was waiting at the store. There's a Muslim Arab shopkeeper, and I was with Christians who went into the part of the Tomb of the Patriarchs that I can't go into. So I was waiting at the store with him, and he was making me this unbelievable tea with so much sugar that it's lucky I'm not diabetic, because I would have gotten into a coma. And we were talking, and he said, you know, my family were Jews 7 generations ago, and we were forcibly converted to Islam. I said, wow. So in addition to and he's fine. I said, well, what are you thinking? He said, no, I'm good where I am. He said, well, what are you thinking? I said, no, I'm good where I am too. So that was fine. But what does that mean? That 7 generations before, there were Jews living in Hebron. Otherwise, that's his Jewish family, right? So you have to read between the lines on that also. So there was never a time that we weren't there. But we've gone all over the place. And I think that we're back because we kept the faith. And now, when I say faith, I don't mean a religiosity necessarily in Israel also. And I know some of you have been to Israel, and I've heard from people like, but how is it that Jews I see driving on the Sabbath in Israel, or Jews, you know, not necessarily in Israel, in other places, not eating kosher food, right? Like if these are your laws, how come not everybody's keeping them? And it's true, and everybody's on their own journey, and everybody is working their way through. But you know that expression, there's no atheist in a foxhole? So Israel is like one big foxhole. And so you'd be hard pressed to find someone in Israel who doesn't in his own way believe in God. It may not be reflected in the way they dress or the way they act, but understanding that there's a bigger picture here, that there's some kind of power out there, and that we are, on the one hand, incredibly important in the idea that what we do affects the world. If we do a kindness, then maybe the person we did the kindness to will do another kindness and another kindness. And if we do something bad, then maybe the person we did something bad to will then move that on. And the ripples in the pond can go in in different directions. So that's a huge responsibility to try and be good people. On the other hand, we're insignificant, right? In the great scheme of things, our 70, 80, 90 years maybe if you don't smoke and you exercise regularly, whatever it is, right? In the blip of mankind, it's not all that great. And again, it's in between those two tensions that a lot of us live. We're very important, we're completely not important. And how do you make that work? So Israel has completely changed me as a person. The thing that has changed me the most, though, of course, is being a mother. And for any of you who are parents in here, I think you'll understand what I'm saying. My children have been my greatest teachers. They have taught me how to appreciate God more, because I've had to learn to give unconditional love when it wasn't so simple, when things were being done that I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, really? But to love them anyway, just because. And it's made me appreciate what God's had to do with a lot of us, which is sometimes he's like, are you kidding me? Really? And he loves us anyhow. And feeling that love is a very important component of who I am. And we were talking about this at the very delicious dinner that I had earlier. There's a Hebrew word, yirah, which can be translated as fear or as awe. And I've worked very, very hard to keep it as awe, because they're very, very close. A lot of times the thing that we're the most afraid of, if you can move past that, you will get over yourself and you will get into a different place. And one of the examples that I'll give is when I'm guiding Jerusalem. And we talk about the temple, and we need also to understand that the language of the Bible, and I'm not talking about Hebrew, even though it is very important to learn Hebrew, because when you don't read it in Hebrew, you're trusting someone else's translation. And Hebrew is a fairly simple language in the number of words, not a whole lot of adjectives and adverbs in Hebrew, but each word can have multiple meanings, which is why some people think the Jews have horns, because the word keren can be the rays of light that came from Moses, is also the same word as horns. All right? So you can see how these things can confuse people. When you read it in the Hebrew, then you understand the multiple layers. So that word yirah is also fear, but can also be awe. And one of the things that I think was interesting when there was a temple and when people used to go to the temple is even the way the building was built. It was built to bring people in. Just imagine, there are people, you had the beautiful shofar blowing here, which is not easy to do. That was very impressive. But you had the silver trumpets, and you had the incense mix, and you had all these senses, and you had singing, you had the Levites singing, and you had all those things, because remember, most people were really country bumpkins. They lived in a little village, right? And not everybody was agoraphobic, agoraphobic, but you could come into this place with suddenly lots of people and get a little nervous, okay? But it drew people in. When we lost that, then Judaism had to change radically, which is why the Judaism that you might be familiar or not familiar with, depending, is a very different Judaism than that was practiced during the biblical period when we were in our land and we had a central place to go to. The Judaism that's practiced in the main today is a Judaism that was put together by the sages after the temple was destroyed, and we were going to have to survive without that central place. They did a pretty fabulous job, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. But it's very different than the biblical period. And one of the challenges now of being Jews and in control of our destiny, at least as much as we can be, back in the land, is how to bring that back into our lives again. So, for example, I saw that you're celebrating the new month. So the festivals, which I imagine a lot of you now keep, the biblical festivals, they all have to do with the harvest in the land of Israel, something that I was not aware of until I moved there. So we have the rainy season, which is now, which is when we sow, S-O-W. And then we have this calendar year, we have a Jewish calendar that has 13 months and not 12, because what the sages would have done in the olden days before the calendar was set is walk the land now. Why now? Because Passover has to be in the spring. It says in the Bible, it's Chag HaAviv, it's the spring festival. It's the new beginnings. It's leaving Egypt. It's crossing, we cross with Joshua into the land right before Passover on the 7th day of Nisan. It's new beginnings, always. And so that's what it marks our calendar as Passover. And therefore, the sages would walk the land when we're almost at Nisan, which is the month of Passover, and say, is winter over? It's very practical. Has it stopped raining? Are the barley and wheat ripening in the field? Are the sheep fat and ready to be sheared? And all the questions you would ask as you transit from one season to the next. We don't have 4 seasons. We have 2. We have a wet season and a dry season and about a week and a half in between. And if the answer was no, they would put in another month to push Passover into the spring. Now that calendar was set in the 4th century, mainly because the sages who were the ones, the Sanhedrin, the council, who would be the ones that somebody would come and say, we saw the new moon, it's a new month now. Many of them were killed by the Romans because the Romans were smart. They didn't have to kill all the Jews. If you killed the Jews who were setting the laws or saying when the new month was so we didn't know when our holidays were, that would kill Judaism. I don't think that we realize the importance of calendar, all right? The calendar and the dates tells you a lot about the people and what's happening. And so Passover is the barley harvest, and then Shavuot is the wheat harvest. So I opened up the book of Ruth, which we read on Shavuot, right, on Pentecost, and it's all happening in the barley and the wheat fields. And I live outside of Bethlehem. Does anyone know what Bethlehem means, the translation of it? Beit Lechem? It means the house of bread. A bait is a house, and lechem is bread. Beit Lechem means the house of bread. So it's a granary center. So of course the book of Ruth is happening near Bethlehem, and in the wheat and in the barley fields, because that's where they used to be. In this one, the Bible really dumbed this one down for us, made it really easy to figure out what's going on here. And then in the summer, we have the fruits of the summer, the figs and the pomegranates and the grapes. And if you look back into the Bible, wow, it's so nice to speak to people who know their Bible. And the sin of the spies, you guys familiar with that? Who, by the way, are not called spies initially. They say Latur ta'aretz. They're scouting out the land. They're only called spies afterwards as a result of what they did. Okay, talk about the road to being paved with good intentions. Okay, this is a classic example. It's a terrible thing that they did. They go back to the desert, and 10 out of the 12, except for Joshua and Caleb, speak ill of the land. And for that generation was punished to not go into the land. Do you understand the message the Bible is giving us here? Speaking ill of the land of Israel is deserving of exile. That is a huge thought. And that's why those of us, when you live in the modern day state of Israel, like any citizens of any country, you're going to complain about the country, the taxes and the this and the that and whatever it is that people complain about the country. I'm very careful to not complain about the land. So I'll complain about the government, or I'll complain about some laws or something like that, but not about the land. Because I have a 3,500-year-old message that's telling me that the price for doing that is very, very high. And that generation does not merit going into the land. So these seem like they're small things, but they're not really small. These are very, very big messages. So the next holiday that we have is Sukkot, right, tabernacle, which is all about the dates. We sit in the booths under schach, under the date palm, and hold the lulav, which is literally the heart of the palm. And that's when the date harvest is happening. So every Sukkot, I take people down to the Jordan Valley where they grow dates, and we pick dates, and we make silan, because that's the holidays reflecting that harvest. And then the last holiday, which is not a biblical holiday, is Hanukkah, which is about olive oil. And sure enough, that happens in the month of Kislev, and that's the olive harvest. So when I realized that, I was like totally blown away. That the religion that we've been keeping for so many years is at home in Israel. It was born in the land, and it is seen, to not try and make a bad pun, it says at its most fruitful, literally, in the land. Because the holidays have so much more meaning when you see what's blooming there. Like, I see the wheat start to bloom, and I'm like, oh, it's going to be Shavuot soon. The land talks to me. I know I sound like a lunatic, but if you're listening, it's another language. And she's also blooming for her children. For those of you who've been there, the food, the fruits, the vegetables, the dairy, the bread, there's something else to it. It makes blessing food kind of like a no-brainer, because you have to thank somebody for that, right? Because it's like, wow, that tomato. My kids laugh at me because I have gone into the food markets, Machane Yehuda, for those of you familiar in Jerusalem, and I have cried over the fruits and vegetables because to me it's a sign of something bigger happening. It's in the details. So sometimes we spend our lives waiting for the big thing to happen. Also in our personal lives, waiting for the big thing. And if you look at the little things, that's what makes up your life, is the little things. And when I've attuned myself to the rhythm of the land of Israel, and she, because for me it's a female sense, in the sense of a nurturing kind of a place, has answered me in more ways that I could ever have imagined. And I feel tremendously blessed to have been able to, first of all, live in a time where I could live in Israel, which wasn't always possible. But not only that, to have listened and gone. As many Jews haven't come to live in Israel. Life is very comfortable in many places in the world, although less comfortable now than it was even a few years ago, as anti-Semitism once more rears its very ugly head. And I think that the world is also kind of back to business as usual. I think the last few decades, people were a little bit shocked at how far it had gone with the Holocaust. Like, we didn't mean gas chambers. We just meant, whatever. Like, just, they don't really fit in, right? Whenever things are not going well, we're the traditional scapegoat. And so the pendulum swung one way, and now I think it's pretty much back to where it usually is, sadly. And that's something that we all have to watch out for, because what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And I think it starts with the Jews because we are seen as, to a great degree, God's people in the world, as representing God in the world, something that I take very seriously. And sometimes we fail. Often we fail, and I don't think we do him justice. But that's the goal, is to be his people in the world and try and live up to, that's a pretty big job description that we have to do. But because of that, I think a lot of the hatreds are aimed towards, well, now it's Israel, because Israel is politically correct anti-Semitism. Well, I don't hate Jews, but like, what is Israel doing with the Palestinians? Like, it's just terrible that they're committing genocide. I don't hate Jews, though. But why is that going on? So first of all, that's not going on, all right? On the one hand, someone will say, well, you really have a demographic problem, right? You can't put Israeli sovereignty on Judea and Samaria because you have all these Arabs living there, and then you're not going to be democratic anymore if you give them the vote, and if you don't give them the vote, then you're an apartheid state and all these things. And then on the other hand, we're accused of genocide. So which one is it? Because if there's lots of Arabs, then we're not killing them, or we are killing them, but somehow there's a lot of them anyway. A lot of these arguments are contradictory, and a lot of them are not based in anything that has to do with any real facts. In addition to the fact that Israel is constantly put under a microscope. So I believe that Israel is not a perfect country. but we're just better than everybody else. But we're always compared to perfection. It's nice to have a lot of people expect things from us. I mean, that's somewhat of a compliment. But it also means that sometimes we're asked or forced to do things that weaken us or that cause people to die, which is a very big thing and a very bad thing. And also that makes life more difficult for the Arabs living in Israel. Look, you have to understand it, and it took me a long time to understand this. Israel's in the Middle East. So this sounds like, okay, we all know the map. Israel's in the Middle East, which means that it is a country of Western values, meaning free speech and democracy and all those things that Westerners like to have. And we can have another discussion about where that's going, because I'm a little afraid of where democracy is going, but let's leave that for now. But we're in the Middle East that has a different culture. The culture in the Middle East, let's call it the Arab culture, because culture comes through language. And when the Arabs pretty much marauded in the 7th century through the Middle East, destroyed the Byzantine Empire, destroyed the Parthian Empire, and took over most of the Middle East and Southern Europe, they put their culture on there, and mainly through language. Language is a very important, language isn't just communication. It's much, much more. The fact that I live in a country where Hebrew is once again a living language is also not something that I take for granted. It infuses it, not necessarily, again, with a religiosity, but with a sense of peoplehood and with a history, just in the phrases that we use, many of which are biblical phrases, and most people don't even know that. When they're like on the news, they'll just like throw in a biblical phrase and I just start laughing. But it's just like becomes part of that. But the Arab culture in the Middle East is very much one of honor and shame, as opposed to guilt and forgiveness, which is where Christians and Jews tend to go. And what honor and shame means is that you don't get over it so quickly. The Shias and Sunnis hate each other because of the Battle of Karbala that happened 1,300 years ago, and they still hate each other. While we're sitting here, Muslims have been killing Muslims. Nobody cares, okay? Muslims have also been killing Christians, okay? Because, look, Arab is a culture, and like there are Christian Arabs, okay? You could say that the Jews of the Middle East, the Sephardi Jews, if you will, the Mizrahi Jews, are Jewish Arabs. Their religion is Judaism, and their culture is the Middle Eastern culture, all right? So it makes it a fascinating place, because in addition to different religions in Israel, you also have people coming from different cultures. All right, you also had in the late 80s 1 million Jews coming from the former Soviet Union, who came with also very different cultural things, very highly educated. We have world-class philharmonics in little towns, like you wouldn't imagine, and the highest rate of like chess masters in the world. And they brought a lot of that in, but under communism, they didn't have much of they weren't really able to practice their Judaism, so they didn't bring very much of that in. And that's just one example. In this ingathering of exiles, there's a whole lot of fascinating stuff happening here. But it means that you cannot judge the Middle East by, let's say American, because I'm here in Florida, let's say American standards. Now, despite ourselves, we all tend to do this. We all tend to project the way that we see the world on other people. Intellectually, we know that it's not true, but we just do it because that's just the way we're wired. And so Israel is judged to Western standards while fighting people who, or trying to secure ourselves against people whose standards are some of the most bestial and cruel on the entire planet. And I do believe that the Israeli Defense Forces is the most moral army in the world. And we have had Israeli soldiers die in order to save the lives of the children of our enemies, because we don't want to shoot at children and they put their children in front of them, because they're playing for keeps. They're not playing a game here. And they will use any means that they have, including, for example, flying airplanes into skyscrapers in Manhattan, because that's all part of the same thing. All right, this isn't a game. This is winner take all. And that was the casus belli, and that was war declared against America on September 11th, 2001, except I don't think most Americans realize that. But that was all part of what's happening in my little plot of land. All right, first it's the Saturday people and then the Sunday people. Or maybe for you guys it's the Saturday people and the Saturday people, okay? And so caring about Israel and caring about the Jewish people is not just doing me a favor. And it's important that it says in the Bible that, he who blesses Israel will be blessed. But it's also for you. Because we tend to be the canary in the coal mine. And whatever ism is out to hurt the good people in the world, be it communism or fascism or Nazism, or now, let's say, fundamentalist Islam, doesn't just end with the Jews. Israel's the little Satan, but America is the great Satan. So when I say that I'm actually more worried about America now than I am about Israel, I'm not kidding. Not just because I think that God is protecting us, because we do have blows. We're not hermetically sealed. Yes, we have an iron dome, which shoots missiles down, which is also something like crazy that happens. And yes, we have a lot of wonderful things going on. But we also, have terrorism, and we have wars, and we have always something going on. But at least, like I said, if given the right to do that, and we also have to see what President Trump, what his plan is all about. And nobody really knows. And I would like to hope that it's something that's good for Israel, but I'm not so sure. It might not be. It might entail like telling Israel that we need to carve another failed Arab state out of the Middle East, okay, to join the line of all the other failed Arab states that already exist in the Middle East, where Christians are the most persecuted people now in the Middle East, outside of Israel, where they're thriving, because Christians are the other, also in the Middle East. So the Jews outside of Israel, there aren't that many Jews in the Middle East outside of Israel, because as I hope you all know, in the early 1950s, the Arab world pretty much threw out all their Jews. So we had, Israel is declared as a state in 1948. We have our War of Independence. We lose 1% of the Jewish population. 6,000 out of 600,000 Jews are killed during the War of Independence in 1948. And then in the next few years, we get the refugees from the Holocaust who come with all their traumas and all the terrible things that have happened to them that most of them couldn't even speak about. And then we get about 650 to 700,000 Jews that are thrown out of the Arab world. Okay, and that's why when you go to Israel, Israel's not a white country. When people talk about Israel being like a racist country, I'm like, are you kidding? Israel's not a white country. Okay, you come and you see Jews of all different colors there. From Ethiopia to Iraq to Libya to the Yemenites, all living. And some of the most beautiful children, I have to say, are the mixed, the ones from the different backgrounds. So, like the beautiful cocoa-colored face with the green eyes, because one of the parents is Yemenite and the other was from Poland, or whatever it is. It's amazing. It's also very good for the gene pool, incidentally. No, really, because a lot of, especially in Europe, a lot of the Jews married other Jews, and because there weren't that many, especially after the Crusades, a lot of these really crummy recessive genes just kept popping up, and so there's breast cancer and all these other kinds of things. So even in a health, just looking at it scientifically, it's funny how God works. Like it looks like it's a natural thing that you would have this ingathering of the exiles and people from different countries. But when you look at it in a different lens, you're like, wow, so he's even making us healthier by having all that happen. So you have the opportunity to marry someone with a different gene pool. And of course, then there's the Jews by choice, which is another element. And so all these things, it depends what glasses you're wearing. So where many people might see coincidence, so those of us who believe in God see his hand. You can look at it that way, or you can look at it that way. It all depends. So in Israel, you need to see what's happening and really understand what's happening in Israel. And now you can. There are, like, the podcasts that we put out, but there are other, and I can give you lists of good places to go to for your news, reliable places to go to for your news, because one of the mixed blessings is that we're in an era of communication. okay, which I also happen to feel is directly related to the Second World War. There were so many secrets during the Second World War and the Holocaust. Nobody really knew exactly what was happening, and there were rumors. And right afterwards, suddenly, there's this communication age. And I see it to some degree almost like the rainbow in the sky after Noah, like the promise that there won't be another flood, is a little bit of, okay, now there can't be secrets, because everybody knows what's going on everywhere, all right? So, but the major world-changing event that I see is actually the Six-Day War in 1967. And I compare it to what happened with Joseph and his brothers. Right? The brothers are standing in front of Joseph, and Judah gives this impassioned speech. Incidentally, one of the things that Yoram Chazoni, the guy who wrote the book about nationalism, in a different book that he wrote, talks about that this is why Judah, and right, David is from the tribe of Judah, this is why he merits the kingship. Even though he's the fourth brother, which in the ancient world inherits nothing, the fourth brother, because he admits that he makes mistakes. He's accountable for his actions. He stands in front of Joseph and he says, he doesn't know he's talking to Joseph, but he says, I messed up with my brother. And also in another incident with Tamar, he acknowledges that he did wrong, and that's what a leader really needs to do. The message that the Bible gives us about leadership are, when you start looking at it put leadership glasses on and now go back to the Bible. Go into the Bible in different times with a different perspective. Start looking at it in terms of relationships. Start looking at it with messages about family. Okay, it's all about family. That was the second thing I started to say, faith and family. Okay, it starts off with a family, a very dysfunctional family, okay, but a family, the message all the way through there. And lo and behold, social work, research is talking about that if you have the structure of a family, communities and countries and societies are much more stable. If you have a father figure who's present and active, let alone the mother figure, right? You have the children raised in a house like that, it's a different kind of house. And when you have societies that are built more or less with families in mind, now go to the Bible. Abraham doesn't go to Canaan on his own when he says, go and I'll show you the land. And so much of it is then about having children, and a lot of the matriarchs are praying, right? There's a theme of barrenness in there as well, and the prayers to have a child. So put on different glasses. Try this experiment, okay? Even if you're familiar with the Bible and you've read it a gazillion times and you think you know it all, now try and read between the lines on a different subject. So try it with family and try it with leadership. And the messages that have come out are really, really something about what kind of leader you're supposed to have and about being responsible. So Judah is a leader who says, I made a mistake and now I want to go in a different direction. He's not, they call, Joseph is called Yosef HaTzadik, like Joseph the righteous one. But he doesn't get the kingship because, as we know, righteous people probably don't belong in politics. Does that come as a surprise to anybody in this room? Okay? It's a murky world. It's a tough world, right? And so Judah, the brothers stand in front of Joseph. They're so afraid of him. He's Pharaoh's number 2. He has their fate in his hands. And then it turns out, beheref ayin, which in Hebrew means like in the blink of an eye, it turns out he's Joseph. Wow. And the thing they're most afraid of is actually their brother. So I think something happened in our world, at least for those of us who are, over 50, which is the Six-Day War. They were completely panic-stricken in Israel in May of 1967. If you talk to people who lived in Israel in May of 67, they were digging mass graves. Israel had no friends. The United States was not a supporter of Israel in May of 1967. The only country that really in any way supported Israel was Czechoslovakia. Other than that, Israel was weak and small, and nobody was interested. And the Arabs were saying, well, we didn't finish in 1948, we're going to finish now. The country's only 19 years old, does not have a strong army, is financially difficult, having a hard time just feeding its people. In the 1950s, you had all these wave of refugees coming in with nothing, and somehow housing and food had to be, well, where did all this come from? It was the 50s and 60s were incredibly difficult. When you come to Israel now, you're seeing a country that's strong and that's at the forefront of a lot of things. It wasn't like that just a few short decades ago. And all of a sudden, in 6 days, in June of 1967, instead of being thrown into the sea, we end up controlling land that's like, liberating land that's like 4 times the size of Israel. And suddenly Hebron, the city of our patriarchs, and the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount is in our hands, and Shiloh and all these places. They have a lot of cities in America that are named after. I find that one of the things that really bothers me. Like, it's okay, Jericho, New York, and Shiloh, Kentucky, and Bethel everywhere, and Hebron everywhere is fine in America, but for some reason, like, Jews are not supposed to be able to live in those places, the original of those places, the copyright, okay? There's like a kind of a double standard. And in 6 days, it all flips. I think that was such a great miracle that it changed the world. It didn't just change Israel, I think it actually changed the world. And if you look back even, let's say, on the Woodstock, like the peace movement, granola and environmental and all that great stuff, that's when all that starts to change. Woodstock, if you will, is 1969. And I think a lot of what's happening in the Christian world also, and your search for your Hebrew roots and for what's happening in the Bible, and realizing that there was a prequel and that that has meaning to you as well, that happens then too. And at least according to what I know, it's not something that was going on before 67. So, God plays out in the world. He does. And what looks like, oh wow, that was just an incredible victory. Yes, it was an incredible victory, and the pilots were in their cockpits. We weren't just sitting there and all of a sudden this thing happened. Very much like Joshua, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Joshua. They're not sitting there and praying, and it's not like leaving Egypt where the sea parts. No. This is roll up your sleeves, and you're going to have to fight, and you're going to have to conquer, and you're going to have to plant, very much like what's happening today. But if you do that, and that's what makes Joshua such an outstanding personality, is that he says we have to do it, but God will be with us all the time. He's making sure that everybody knows that God, if we're doing it for the right reasons, then God will be with us. He repeats that all the time. He doesn't take personal credit, and he doesn't say, this is me. Okay, all the time he's repeating, God will be with us, God will be with us. And if you see that reflected in today, like I said, I think the 6-Day War, look, they don't study the 6-Day War at West Point. They don't study in military academies because nobody could figure out what happened. It doesn't make any sense militarily. So where something doesn't make sense is where I see God, because that's exactly the difference. And so that war changed your world. It definitely changed my world. One of the things that I'm working hard on in Israel, along with Jeremy Gimpel and some of the guys that you might know from the station, the next stage is to work on our own government to finally apply Israeli sovereignty on lands that were liberated in 1967, because we didn't complete that. It was almost, sometimes things happen too fast and you're not ready for them. And so that's something that we have to be wary of as well. Sometimes we get impatient and we think that the process is too slow. There's something to that. There's something to being able to take a step and absorb it, and then take the other step and absorb it. When it happens too quickly and you're not ready for it, and I think maybe that's what happened to my leadership in 1967. Nobody expected it to be over in 6 days, and therefore we left the Temple Mount because we didn't realize that we were supposed to be on the Temple Mount and not just at the Western Wall. The temple was built on a threshing floor, right? That's what David buys from the Jebusite, is a threshing floor. A threshing floor is a very interesting place. It's where you separate wheat from chaff. And if you've been to Jerusalem and picture the Temple Mount, it's a mountain, but it's not the highest mountain around. Mount of Olives is higher, Mount Zion is higher, Mount Scopus is higher. So it's getting just enough wind, but not too much. If it was too much, it would all blow away. Like the Hayovel people who are on the Mount on Har Bracha right now, and it's cold and it's windy, right? So you don't want too much wind. I think there's an incredibly important message on the fact that the temple was built on a threshing floor. It's understand the difference between wheat and chaff. One is good and one is essentially garbage. And many of us today are being fed garbage and being told that that's the truth, whether it's through the media or other things. So when you read the Bible, understanding those messages, they lived in a very agricultural world. Like in Isaiah, he talks about in Messianic times, like when all things are good, what's the vision? Is that we will beat our swords into plowshares. What does that mean? We're not going to be sitting around. It's not beat our swords into a remote control or I don't know, whatever. It doesn't mean that you'll just be sitting. It means that you'll be working. Plowshares don't work unless somebody's pushing them. But the ideal of peace is to be able to work and feel safe, not to not work. A lot of people now, leisure time is the goal. But what the Bible is telling us is it's a blessing to be able to work in peace. And that's what Isaiah is telling us. But that's a totally agricultural vision. And when you read the Bible and understand that, and I've been blessed to be able to live in the land and then to be able to read the Bible and understand those messages that completely went over my head when I wasn't into the rhythm of the land. Now I know what that means. Is to be able to till your soil in peace is the greatest blessing of all. And so try and do that. First of all, you need to come and really understand it and take that back with you. But then read it with, look, it's a different time. The Bible is written in a time that most of us really are never going to understand. The world is different. There are no atheists in the ancient world. The fight isn't between God people and not God people like it is today. It's between, God people and pagans or idol worshipers or whatever that is. It's a different dynamic than we have today. But understand it for the message that it's giving. And I think that Americans have a lot to learn from Israel, not just in the biblical sense, but those messages of faith and family, which I think is maybe starting to get lost in this country. And a sense of taking things for granted. I mean, how many Americans appreciate World War II? Here, I've been here on Memorial Day. It's all about the shoe sales. And in Israel, Memorial Day, everything is closed. And there's sad music on the radio, and there's probably not a family in Israel that doesn't have some grave to go to of a soldier or a terror victim or both. We understand the price. You can't appreciate something if you don't understand the price that was paid for it. And in Israel, we understand the price that was paid for it because we're still paying it. So there's no room for not being appreciative. But appreciation means thanking who, what. And that kind of forces you into realizing that there's something bigger afoot in whatever way you want to interpret that. So we have a lot to do in Israel, but that's my work. And I'm not going to put that on you because that's my work as an Israeli, to make sure that we get the best government, that we get the best leaders, which right now, I'll just tell you, nobody dies of boredom in Israel. Like, that's just not even on the book. And just in the last couple of days, there's all these things happening. And we're also still trying to find something that you're doing here in the States also, is a balance between the elected representatives and the judiciary who aren't elected and very often take too much power to themselves, which undermines democracy because they weren't elected, which means that they're not representing the people. So we have that going on in Israel as well. We have a very active judiciary, and it's not always, I think, in its appropriate place. So we're working on that as well. But we take it seriously. We have elections on April 9th. It sounds like it's so close, but I can tell you that anything can happen between now and April 9th. So many different configurations of things that can happen. And we're a very young country in terms of, we're a very old country, but we're a very young state. And we're constantly having to defend ourselves, and we're in a part of the world where we've succeeded beyond what anybody thought should happen, in terms of developing medications and high tech and so many things that I'm so proud that Israel is at the forefront of doing, and not for ourselves, because we really believe that we need to make the world a better place. And we try and do it all the time. If you don't think that makes our neighbors jealous and resentful, and that's, I think, a big part of what's happening, is that with all their oil wealth and the numbers of people, somehow they're just not able to do what this little country has been able to do in the last 70 or 80 years. And that also causes resentment and jealousies. But, with this I'll end because I want to take questions. We don't get up in the morning in Israel and worry, which in itself is a strength. Okay, we get up in the morning and we think about work that we have to go to, or how to get the beet juice out of the white t-shirt that somebody stained the day before, or the mundane things that people everywhere do. And then sometimes we get like a little something that jolts us out of that. But most days are days just like anywhere else. And it's, when I'm out of the land for more than 2 weeks, I feel my strength ebbing. You ever plug in your cell phone? This is a good way of making it relevant for everybody. You ever plug in your cell phone and you think it was plugged in, and then you go back a couple hours later and it wasn't really plugged in, so the battery is like only half charged? That's how I feel when I'm out of the land for more than 2 weeks, basically for more than 2 Sabbaths, more than 2 Shabbatot. I feel like my soul is not being recharged, and I have to get home. Whether it's a portal to something else, there's some kind of energy there. I can't explain it, and not everybody feels it, and that's fine too. But I feel it. I feel that the land literally gives me a jolt of energy, and I feel tremendously blessed to be able to take that in. I feel like chosen in many ways, which is a pretty special way to live. And so I really want to thank you all, first of all, for inviting me in, especially to Pastor Nick, and letting me share a little bit about my life with you. And I'd really love if you have questions, and don't be nervous about you might insult me or whatever. I've been there, I've done that. So I'd really like you to take the opportunity to ask somebody who's living a very intense life in Israel, anything you wanted to know.
And I want to make this a little more personable, even though we're live streaming as well. So if Ryan can come, he's going to do the microphone. But if you could come up and then just ask her the question in front of her, that would be great. And make sure you say it clearly, and we'll go from there. And if you guys are really nice and Ryan likes you, he will pick you.
I don't know how I get so. It's funny you mentioned your work, but I think I could speak on behalf of Pastor Nick and myself and the congregation here. We're behind you, right? We support what you're doing and all that. So,
thank you.
The many hands make light work. Amen. So, all right, come on. Don't be shy, guys. As she did, listen, she's glutton for punishment. I promise you. She's told us like 6 times. No question is out of order. So if you have a question, just ask it.
Well, I'm going to just pick one of several, okay? I came prepared this trip. Is it possible to visit the site of the red heifer?
The site of the red heifer?
Where the red heifer was done on the Mount of Olives.
I'm not sure that we know exactly where it was.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot of confusion still about things.
Okay.
And where things exactly were. There's educated guesses.
Yeah.
But they are trying to raise another one.
We know that.
All the
yes.
time.
Yes,
So
all the time, right. Yes.
we shall see.
Right, yes. And personally, ever since my first trip to Israel, I've not had a heart until I go back. And he puts it back in for that short time.
Yeah, I get it. Nothing?
All right, come on down. This is Miss Joanne Ciceri. Yeah, I can ask that. That's good.
So good to have you here. I'm sure I speak for all of us, but you know, we're just a small community in Brandon, Florida. We're just regular people in Brandon, Florida, with a heart for Israel. What can you tell us what is the best thing besides praying, which we do, but what is the best thing or most effective thing that we could do to support the nation of Israel today?
Okay. Don't minimize who you are. I come from a very small people who managed to change the world. So it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And everything you do, first of all, God's always watching. Okay. You know, there's the two matriarchs, Leah and Rachel, were both married to Jacob. And Leah had most of Jacob's children, but didn't have his love. And Rachel had his love, but had a great difficulty having children and even ends up dying in childbirth. So their legacies, though, are what they wanted. Like, they may have thought that in their lifetime they failed, but Leah is the one who's buried with Jacob in the tomb of the patriarchs. She's the wife as the couple. And of all the matriarchs, it's Rachel who's known as Rachel Imenu, as Rachel the matriarch. So their legacies are exactly what they wanted. They probably didn't know. So I think that that's an incredibly important message. Another message the Bible is giving us is you have to try your hardest. And you may not think that you've succeeded, but you might even after you're gone. And especially when you have children and you raise them in a certain way, that outlives you. So on a more practical level, though, what to do for Israel is to bring people like myself to talk to you and to get it out there as much as you can. Also, obviously, to come and to not let political correctness wear you down. Because political correctness is not this, okay? And the campuses are a disaster. And the campuses are all about anti-Israel and anti-Jewish, a lot of things. And I'm afraid that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And not just Pittsburgh. I was here in Tampa a few months ago, just after the murders in the synagogue in Pittsburgh. And you see it more and more and more and more. It's already happened in Europe. Jews don't walk around Europe safely with signs that look, not signs, but looking like they're identifiably Jewish, and it could be happening here. Don't let that happen, because it's not just about the Jews, it's about God. And so to not just let things slide because, I don't want to rile it up, or to be at the forefront. This is a battle for America. I love this country. I love this country. I mean, when I say God bless America, I mean God bless America. This is an outstanding country. And what's going to be? So, again, in defending Israel, you're also defending America. And so you can multitask. You really can. And to keep that going. And to raise your children and anyone you get in contact with understanding that. And through the Bible with understanding that as well, which is where you guys are at, is back in that rhythm again of where this all came from.
Mr. Bill Carter. Come on down.
Shalom. Pleasure having you here. I've had pleasure listening to you for quite a while now. I'm really blessed with that. I was wondering as a people here, we believe that we are part of our faith is being grafted into the seed of Abraham. And God has changed us from the lifestyles we came from, and we came through the Christian lifestyle, and then now we're in a Hebrew Christian lifestyle, and we've turned from a lot of us, our family traditions and stuff like that, and we've embraced the Hebrew traditions of the feasts and festivals, Sabbath, eating and everything else. And most of us believe that one day, maybe not us or our children, would be the sojourners that join in with you, with Israel. And are you seeing the winds of a Aliyah type thing for Hebrew type Christians to be grafted into the people of Israel? Anything like that
In the
coming
country itself, or?
for Hebrew type Christians being able to?
Look, I think that there is a great opportunity here for working together. One of the things in Judaism is that we don't believe that everybody has to take on Judaism. We believe that God loves everybody. We all just have different jobs in the world to do. So I don't really know how to answer that question. I'm
wasn't
very
sure how to ask
secure. Yeah.
But we all believe, a lot of us been there, and then we believe we belong there too. Once we
Right.
step foot on that land, we're home. And then we have to leave. And we all desire, strong desires to go back, and a lot of us want to be there all the time. And
Right. So look, on a practical level, we need a Jewish country. There are many Christian countries in the world and many Muslim countries. There's only one little country that's Jewish, meaning that the holidays, the national holidays are Jewish holidays, even though other religions get their days off also, including Muslims and including Christians, but that there's a country where the majority of the people are Jews. So I don't know what's going to be in the future. I'm too little to predict anything. I'm definitely not a prophet. I think we need to start with baby steps, which is to first find the common ground, build trust, which for a long time there wasn't between Jews and Christians. What will be, will be. I don't know where we're going with that. But let's start from what we can do now, which is to find what we have in common, work together against common enemies, but not just from a negative sense, work together to build an awareness of the greatness of God in the world, that things aren't just happening. There's, something bigger happening here. And I think, at least for me, that's, a good place to start. I don't get into theological discussions with people. I know who I am. I feel that God loves me tremendously and that he brought my people home. And that's what I live by. And Christians and people of other faiths, you're on your own journey. And I think it's phenomenal that we can even have this conversation. A few decades ago, I don't think we could have had this conversation. So even that is a huge thing. And I wish you all, I was going to say luck, but maybe Godspeed in that sense, in where you're going, each one of you as individuals, in seeing some of the things that maybe weren't good and heading towards something better. And I think this is a great place to start.
So to help Bill out on his question, I think some of us have a dream that Judea and Samaria could use a few more pro-Israel people.
Right.
And we have a few pro-Israel people here that maybe the government of Israel could be a little kind on their immigration policy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I actually, funny story, I asked Nadi Ram if he'd take up my case. I think I told you that.
Yeah.
So, hey, if I come squat in Judea and Samaria, you can take my case? And he just kind of laughed and looked at me
Right.
like I was funny.
Right.
Hi, my name is Peggy.
Okay.
I grew up in a Presbyterian home, but I've been here at Beit Tehila since 2004. I've got 2 grandchildren. They're 8 and 9 years old. They're being brought up in Orlando in a Presbyterian home. But I may have one chance to bring them to Israel, and I'm wondering at what age, they're 8 and 9, at what age would be a good age to bring them now? You were 8 years old when you went.
That's true. Any age can work, but don't expect too much from the trip. Meaning, the most important thing is that they have a great time with you. Because at that age, a lot of it, not just at that age, is emotional. So if they feel like you're just dragging them from one dusty archaeological site to another, they're not going to have a good time. And if you say, so this happened here and this happened there, and they're like, okay, all right. But if you go there and you just point out things that they wouldn't notice, just like the language that's being spoken. Do you know that that's an ancient language that everybody thought was dead and now has been revived? That's the language of the Bible. That person just ordered pizza in the language of the Bible. No, but the things that most people would not even notice, to point that out to them and take them to the beach to have a great time and take them to Jerusalem and to not hide things from them. I think it's a very big mistake when people kind of like sugarcoat things. These kids are smart, and we're all, at some point, if you lose your credibility, you lose your credibility. You know what I mean? So take them there and say, this is a country in progress, and this is, and these are Bible people who've come back here, and they're working their way through it, just like we're working, our way through it. But the food is so good. And just, and if you want to, and that's important to you, to take them where Jesus did this or Jesus did that, if that's going to speak to them, so that they understand look, he lived in a Jewish world, right? I mean, he was a Jew. So the context, the first time I ever guided a Christian group, and I said to them flat out, why did you take me as a guide? I'm an Orthodox Jew. I wouldn't guide them on Saturday. Right? I don't work on Shabbat no matter what. And they said, well, we want to learn the Bible, so who else would we take? I said, wow.
So anytime from now till their teens, okay.
Yeah, just plan the trip with their age in mind. Don't expect them to do something that a 20-year-old would do. Age appropriate, camel rides, or whatever it would be. I'll give you an example, and I brought this here. The Bible talks about tzitzit, right? The strings on the four-cornered garment. So one of the things, and I know the people who are doing this, is that they've now rediscovered the snail, the Trunculus murex, from which the blue dye comes from. Okay? And that's why this is a tzitzit, and we're wearing this again. Because color also has a tremendous symbolism, royal blue. And there's a reason that the Israeli flag also has that color. All right? It's seen as the sky and the sea are blue, but only when it's together. If you look at air and water, it's clear. But when it's all together, then it has a color, it has a vibrancy. So what I'll do is take, during the summer, the people who do the tchelet, or that's what the color is called, they do diving for the snail at the beach. So you can go in, the kids go snorkeling, and they look for the snail. Okay, it happens to be endangered in Israel, so you find the snail and then you put it back. The snails that they get the dye from come from somewhere in Greece or Croatia, all right? But to have them actually have a good time, and you're teaching them the Bible. I mean, the last Torah portions, you guys study the Torah portions? So it's been all about the tabernacle, and it's been about the tchelet and argaman and tolad shani, the colors. This is the tchelet that you guys have been reading about. The blue and the royal purple and the red. So I would say have them have an experiential experience, all right? That, take them to have the 7 species, and you can open the Bible and say, this is the food of the land. Like when you eat this fig, you're not just eating a fig, all right? And when you dive for the snails, this is something that was in the Bible that they talked about. And try and connect it that way, and you will have a phenomenal trip, because that's probably not something that grown-ups do. But in teaching them, you'll see it in a different way.
All right, this is Mr. Paul Robinson.
Yes, ma'am. I was listening to a discussion on the radio some time ago with 2 Jewish gentlemen. And
Were they disagreeing with each other?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. You were listening to Jewish people, yeah.
But they were saying that the Palestinian Jew that the Palestinians that given the most trouble to Israel, they were once Jews who wanted to become counted in Israel as a Jew, but somehow the authority didn't give them that privilege. So that's why they are the ones who are giving Israel the most problem now. Is that true, or?
So I don't know to what you're exactly referencing, but I do know, and maybe this is what they were talking about, that there are Muslims in the land who, as I said, were formerly Jews who were converted to Islam, and some of them have become the worst terrorists because they have to prove that they're not really Jews, right? Because someone may know their family history. So how do you do that? Is by becoming a terrorist and killing Jews. Maybe in particular, there's a village called Yatta, which is just south of Hebron. And 4 or 5 years ago, there was a terrorist incident in Tel Aviv where 2 brothers from that village came and killed like 4 people in one of the markets in Tel Aviv. Now, their last name is winemaker. Muslims do not drink wine. They are from a formerly Jewish tribe who at some point was converted to Islam, and it's known. Now, it could be that that was the impetus of them doing the terrors because they don't want anyone to think they're Jews, so that's what they did. I don't know the context of the show that you listened to. That's something that maybe is what that they were discussing.
You got to keep that street cred, Ooh, this is Ashley Cabrera.
Do you guys know each other?
Kind of, just a little bit. I wanted to piggyback off of your comment about making it real for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so great because here in our congregation, we want to make these feast days and Shabbat fun and not something that, mom and dad changed their ways and now they have all these rules and whatever. And we're not. That's what we love, the essence of Judaism and the culture, the Israeli culture, because it's very hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
Your feast days are build a sukkah, wave a lulav. So we have lots of homeschool moms, and that's just perfect. But that was just to piggyback. But my question was, you have 7 children, correct? Which is amazing. Mm-hmm. When did you get to start advocating and becoming more independent? Like, what age were your children?
Okay, so some of the advocating I was already doing when we were in Los Angeles before we moved to Israel. I was very busy with kids when we first came, but I would start like taking people around where I live because I realized, and this was in 1988, 89, that what people were saying about Judea and Samaria and what I was watching were not the same thing. There's a lot of coexistence among the Arabs and the Jews in the area. It's not like everybody's like always fighting with each other. There's a lot of things that are happening on a day-to-day level, and their villages have completely, and maybe unfortunately, grown tremendously since the '67 war in terms of the infrastructure. So people would come and I would try and show them things. Like there are Arabs living in mansions and Jews living in very small shacks. There's one of the things that a lot of people will say is, the Jews are rich and they take the land and the water, and the poor Arabs. And that's what you're always told is the poor Arabs, which also sits on a nice little bundle of anti-Semitism, that particular statement, the money-grubbing Jews, okay? And it's also not true. So I started taking people around and working with journalists. At some point I started with a radio show. Actually, Yishai Fleischer is the one who interviewed me once and said, I think you could do this also. And I just started laughing at him. And now I'm like close to 20 years later and I am doing it. And I was on the local council in Efrat, my town. I was pregnant with number 6 during the elections. The first meeting that we had was the day of his brit, of the circumcision. I actually brought the leftover cheesecake from the party we had to the first meeting because I wanted to make a nice impression, and bringing 3 cheesecakes was a good way of doing it. So I served it was a volunteer position. I did that for 10 years. So I got to know a bit of the political world also, enough that I knew I didn't want to get involved with it. And my Hebrew got a lot better too, because I made some catastrophically embarrassing mistakes. So it worked its way out. So it was like little by little, and just gathering it over the years. But yeah, I became a tour guide 10 years ago because when the kids got bigger, so then I was able to do more.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely been a process. I wouldn't have been coming to the States and things like that if I had little kids at home. Still, my priority was always the kids. And it's interesting because people think that the Bible is against women. Or very often I'll hear this from other Jews, that religious Judaism is misogynistic or against women. And I think that's a very big misread of the Bible. As a matter of fact, and this is something that I just thought about a few weeks ago because my brain doesn't never stop. It is true that women are named less in the Bible than men are. And I believe it's because we needed it less. Anyone who's a mom realizes that most of the time you are not going to be thanked for what you do. And you learn to understand that what you do is so important, but you're not going to get thanked. Sometimes I think, again, that connects me to God, because he must sometimes think, they're not appreciating, look, all this stuff I'm doing, and they're not appreciating it. So my mom moments are very much where I relate to God. Right? I'm like, wow, I understand. I just did all this stuff, and I can't say I told you so, or I can't say I did this for you because I want them to think they did it on their own. So I have to keep it to myself. Moms, you know what I'm talking about? Okay? So I started looking at the Bible that way, that I also feel that many women are inherently, and again, this is a gross generalization, are inherently more in tune or more spiritual than many men. When you give birth, you are the closest thing that you're creating a human being. That is about as godlike as it gets. So when I started looking at the Bible in that way, I thought, wow, we didn't need to be named so much. It wasn't even written so much with us in mind, because we got it. The Bible was written to bring us closer to God. But if you're already really close to God, then it's an amazing book, but you don't need the credits. And so that's my Jewish feminism, is not to try and be like a man, but to try and be an outrageous woman and love God through my femininity and through the things that as a woman I've been blessed to do that I wouldn't have been blessed to do as a man. And yeah, being a woman is a whole lot more complicated than a guy. I totally get it. Totally get it. And all you husbands are like, oh yeah, amen. I get it. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. And so that's kind of been this new view that I have on the Bible right now. But yeah, the kids have and remain my priority. I wake up in the morning, and only one of them lives at home right now. He's studying university. He's living at home. And the first thing I do is say Modani, which is a prayer that we say to thank God for giving us our soul back. And the next thing I do is go through my kids in my head. Where is she? Where is he? What's going on? And then I get out of bed.
I am technically a millennial, and I'm offended.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
Praise the Lord, Daniel. We'll have Daniel will finish us up here, and amen. It's getting
I have a
late.
son,
We do have
Daniel. I love
contracted childcare out there, and this could be special, right, Daniel?
I'll try and make it special. So, good evening, ma'am. My name is Daniel, and I just came back from DC, so I've had a lot of political things going through my head. So I'm sorry if I changed the topic a lot from the previous one. With all the politics that's going around over Judea and Samaria, and as somebody who lives in Judea and Samaria, coming from the American political side and from the Western mindset, I know that most politicians today don't have the mindset that I do when it comes to Judea and Samaria being the biblical heartland of Israel. And there has to be, at some point on the political side, that there will be concessions that will have to be made someplace in the political system. And I know that on the Israeli counterpart side, on the Palestinian side, there's no concessions that are made, but the Israelis are always willing to make concessions through the Liberal Party. At what point do those black and white lines get drawn?
Oh, that's such a good question. I keep thinking we've reached that point, and then, I was in Gaza in 2005 when 25 Jewish communities were destroyed and 9,000 Jews were thrown out of their homes, which is why we now have essentially a Hamas state in Gaza. So I keep thinking that there's a learning curve here. We very much want to live in peace. And so the differences among Israelis are not, do we want to live in peace or not? One of the things that makes me crazy is when people say, well, you live in Judea, so you're obviously anti-peace. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, I believe in coexistence, which is why I think I should stay. How are we coexisting if you take all the Jews out? What's coexistence about that? I don't know, when we're going to figure that out. You're saying in terms of like putting his sovereignty on Judea and Samaria?
Not so much sovereignty, but along the lines of land for peace, of
So we tried
having
land
a
for peace.
state where maybe a demilitarized state, or maybe
Okay.
giving up a community here or there. At what point
Okay.
do the concession lines get drawn?
So first of all, the fact that the Palestinian Authority, shall we say, is a terror regime. Mahmoud Abbas is a terrorist, flat out. He may wear a suit, but that doesn't make him any less than a terrorist. You and I are coming from a place of peace is the greatest thing there could be. Like, just stop arguing. So you'll have a little less than you wanted, and you'll have a little less than you wanted, but there won't be war. And that's what Western democracies go by. It doesn't work like that in the Middle East. What I talked about before about us being in the Middle East, that's exactly what I mean. There's no compromise is weakness. All right, so there is a perfect storm going on right now of Arab nationalism, of Islamic tenets which say that whatever was once Muslim is forever Muslim. Meaning, when we ask them to say, okay, I recognize a Jewish state, which is what you're saying, compromise, they can't do it. But they really can't do it because it takes away the essence of who they are. And we need to respect that. And I'm saying respect not in the way of like, yay, that's wonderful, but acknowledge that that's how they feel. And Israel, I think to some degree, has been too Western in that sense of just constantly making concessions because there's one side that wants to make concessions and then there's another side that doesn't. So we're the ones who keep doing that. And every single time we leave land, it turns into a base for terror. We gave away the Sinai to Egypt for a peace treaty with Egypt, and the Sinai Desert now has become terror central. ISIS and every horrible person is in the Sinai. We left Lebanon, and we didn't even have Jews living in Lebanon. We just had the buffer zone, and now it's total chaos there too. So I would hope that we have governments that realize that we need to put sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria. And I would hope that you guys realize that that also makes a better life for the Arabs living there. One of the things that you have to be wary of is, we live in a free society. I live in a free society. I can say whatever I want. Someone might get mad at me. You live in a free society, theoretically, right? The Middle East outside of Israel is not free. They're fierce societies, not free societies. So I have had conversations with Arabs who live in Judea, where they have told me how much they hate Mahmoud Abbas, how much they hate the Palestinian Authority, how they would love to be under Israel. But if a camera opened up and filmed them, they would deny all of it. Because their own people would kill them for saying that, because it's seen as a betrayal. All right? And you need to know that when you're watching the news or hearing them, they're not necessarily telling you the truth, because there's reparations, there's ramifications on their side. And that's a very big problem that we have. We're coming from different places. The only way that they will ever accept in Israel is when they have no choice. And that's it. We keep making the openings and weakening ourselves, and in there, they're coming. And that's a problem that we have in my country, and that's something that some of us are trying to work on. And again, not just from the religious perspective, okay? But from that practical perspective of understanding the culture and the way that they are. So, we keep trying, and I certainly hope that my children and grandchildren will one day, that we won't have to have an IDF anymore. That would be great. But right now, the only people that are surviving in the Middle East are people who've carved out a space for themselves and are protecting it with everything they have. And that includes the Kurds and the Israelis and a few other people, not the Christians, not the Yazidis, and not a whole lot of other tribes that have been slaughtered in the last few years. It's a jungle. It's not pretty. It's not Florida. It is survival of the fittest. It's very biblical. That's the way it is.
One really quick follow-up question.
Sure.
With what you were just bringing up on the Palestinian side of it, I was just reflecting actually as I was sitting there on Musab Hassan Yosef, the former son of the leader of Hamas, and with his experience with the people of Palestine. Is it ethical at some point or proper for the Israeli government to step in the peace process, to step in on behalf of the average Palestinian to make their lives better in the government
Israel's
sense?
doing that every single day. Okay? They're in our hospitals. They're even in Gaza, which is an enemy entity. Israel sends hundreds of truckloads a day with medicine. I mean, we're taking care of the enemy. I don't know any other country who would do that. But when you hear, like the son of Hamas, he has no power. All right? When we say that it's not a democracy, it means that even if 85% of them are just amazing people, it doesn't matter. Because when you live in regimes like that, the people with the guns and the cruel people are the ones who get on top. That's what happens in not just the Middle East, in a good part of the world, like even good parts of Africa and South America. Americans, to a great degree, are very naive about what the world is like. The neighbors are Mexico and Canada and two big oceans on either side. That is not the real world. The real world is a very, very tough place. And when Israel is told, but there are moderates there, of course there are moderates there. And my husband's a physician. His favorite nurse in the office is the Arab nurse, okay? We're not racist, we don't care, we're fine. But the good ones among them have no power. And when we left, then we created the Palestinian Authority with the Oslo Accords in '93. You think that we thought we were creating a terror state? Israelis convinced ourselves that it was going to be a democratic Palestinian state side by side with Israel and let bygones be bygones. That's not what happened. The rotten people came to the top. That's what happened in Gaza also. That's what happens all around the Arab world. And even other places, when we get rid of the Shah, so who do we get something worse. Every time we take down some horrible dictator, something worse comes in its place. So maybe we need to realize, look, I happen to think that there needs to be a major reform in Islam. As Christians, you guys are going through your stuff. Jews are going through our stuff. Islam needs a major, major, major rehaul. But none of us can affect that. We have to stand by, protect ourselves, and hope they work it out. It may take 5 years, it may take 500 years. But the Arabs, the Muslims and the Arabs that live in Israel are the best off in the entire Middle East, and they know it. But they're not going to say it to you or to the camera because they can't. But they'll say it to me because they trust me, because they know that I just want it to be good. I know that this flies in the face of a lot of the stuff that you're here, but that's actually how it is. And they respect me because I'm a proud Jew. And they respect people who have self-respect.
That's awesome. Let me just maybe leave you guys with two things. God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And so as we're experiencing things here at Beit Tehila, we're like pioneers here, you know what I mean? But if I could say two things as you leave today. Number one, please practice your faith the way you believe. Don't go along with everybody else. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Practice your faith the way you want to practice your faith, Yeshua said, give to God what is God. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And if you're just getting by, you're not really living out your faith. Because faith requires an action. Amen? So just think about that when you leave. Sometimes you're wondering, man, I'm overwhelmed with all of this, and what's Beit Tehila doing? What's going on here? What's this lady doing from Israel? What is going on here? Listen, when you wake up, how are you practicing your faith? Are you praying? Are you reading your Bible? What do you believe that you're actually attaching an action to? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? And so with that, I wanted to leave you with that. And also, I can't encourage you enough to study the prophets. The prophets tell us what's going to happen. He declares the end from the beginning. So get into the prophets, study the prophets, look at it. There's a reference in Joel, and the nations are trying to strong-arm Israel to give up land. God's going to have enough of this. And that's when the Messiah comes and things happen. He says, that's it, right? You've divided up my land, you've scattered my people, and he's fed up, And so with that, we need to be thinking about it. And so, once again, think about those two things. How do you practice your faith? Where's the action behind it? Study the prophets. Do you believe God's word? Do you believe God's word? There's the camp of the wicked, but there's the camp of the righteous too, right? I think God's power is greater than what the culture is doing. Amen? Don't you feel like that? I feel empowered here at Beit Tehila. I feel empowered in this community and opportunities that God gives us to shine a light. How many know what I'm saying? I feel more empowered than I do ABC World News with David Muir. And then he doesn't even show up. He's got some guy filling in for him. It makes it even greater. Whose report will you believe? Whose report will you believe? So we really appreciate you coming, and I believe it's an answer to prayer. I believe it's a God thing. I'm putting my faith behind this woman and her family and what she's doing. Been listening to her podcast for 2 years, and now she's here. But how many of you would love to have her back? Amen. She has an agent, Rachel Moore. She has an agent that helps set up all of her activities and her visits and things and speaking engagements. And so I just tell this quick story, but I was talking with Rachel, and I thought, man, I got her on the phone. I'm just going to ask her a question. So we were talking, and it was really great. I was just, and I won't get into the conversation, but I just threw out there. I said, so the election's coming up. Are you Likud or Labor? And so we just had a great conversation, and I just wanted to get her perspective on what's going on in Israel. What are you seeing in your neighborhood? What are you seeing in Israel? Because we don't know, do we? You don't have any idea what's going on over there, and even in the political system or geographically speaking, And I tell you, back in 2016, I did a little study on the West Bank and that whole area, Judea and Samaria, and I'm telling you, if I'm not mistaken, it's closing in on 500,000 Jewish residents, all in that area in Judea, 500,000? Now think about this. How are you going to carve out a Palestinian state with 500,000 Jews scattered throughout Judea and Samaria? I don't see how you're going to do that. You're not going to kick out 500,000 Jews to make a Palestinian state. Would you all agree? How are you going to do that? You can't even pull that off. I can't even get all my kids in one car. How are you going to take Jews out of Judea and Samaria, right? How are you going to do it? And you guys don't know this, but it's pretty much a fact. If you think about it, if there is a Palestinian state, not one Jew can live in it. I mean, we talked about that, didn't we? They're not going to let it, and a Jew's not going to live there. Now, imagine that. Now, there's coexistence right now in Judea and Samaria. What is there, 2 million Arabs in Judea and Samaria?
The numbers are all over the place because
It's a numbers game.
you guys support a lot of them as so-called refugees. And UNRWA, and
Gotcha.
a lot of
all
it
these
is
organizations.
perpetuated by the American taxpayer. So the numbers are all over the place because they don't report when grandma dies because then they stop getting food stamps for grandma. So the numbers are very, very, very unreliable. But yeah,
Right.
it's
So just keep this in mind as you read your Bible and read the prophets. I mean, something's coming to a head. Something's coming to a head, and we need to be encouraged. Amen. So we want to thank Eve for coming, and once again we want to take up an offering for her. And she was so kind to come here and work us in and everything, And she's got a busy schedule and a lot of stuff going on. And but how many of you really want to have her back for a couple days? A couple days.